Welcome to the People Matter podcast, where we shine a light on the professionals shaping the future of work in Jamaica and beyond. This is powered by the Human Resource Management Association of Jamaica, and this series brings you real stories, expert insights, and impactful conversations with leaders who are transforming workplaces, industries, and lives. I'm your host, Michael McAnuff Jones, and today's conversation is one you do not want to miss. HR is no longer just about policies and paycheck. It's not a strategic core of business success. Post-pandemic realities have forced companies to reimagine leadership, rethink people management, and reshape organizational culture. HR, HRD, HRM, it's all together today. So joining us today is Dr. Cassida Jones Johnson, an accomplished HR leader who has successfully navigated through 25 years of experience, real experience in driving strategic transformation across Jamaica, the UK, the US, and the Caribbean, our HR citizen. Cassidy is currently the president of HRMAJ and also consults with major brands across industries, helping them build stronger, people first workplaces with one goal: redefining what HR leadership means in Jamaica today. Cassida, welcome.
Thank you so much, Michael. And for the record, we are not husband and wife by exes at all, even though we may have the same name, Jones.
I'm going to try to remember that for the rest of this interview. Okay, so I'm just going to jump right into the conversation today. So happy to have you here. So we've had surveys from Deloitte and PwC that have been speaking about companies seeing a return on their digital investment. But that's not just about system upgrading. It's also about HR leaders stepping up to drive transformation and lead the cultural shift that's required to make those investments meaningful. So tell me, Cassida, how have you seen the role of HR leadership in this broader context in the last 5 to 10 years?
Okay. Well, I'm going to break it in two segments. Let's talk about the last 10 years. So 10 years ago, would have been at 2015, and we had more paper pushing rather than digital HR. We also had the entrance of a new set of generations, especially the millennials. All right. And the millennials brought something new to HR, which was they like flexibility, they like more control of their career, and they don't like staying as long as our parents and even us, where we would stay with a company for 20 to 30 years. That's out of the window. They're actually more entrepreneurial. So HR had to actually deal with all of that over the past 5 to 10 years. And now we have, within the past 5 years, we had the pandemic. So we had the Gen Zs, as we say in the UK, but Gen Z in Jamaica, having to study digitally or virtually, and then enter the workplace, sometimes even digitally or virtually before they actually see someone. So HR had to actually manage all of that over the past 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, well, that's interesting. And as you know, we're still trying to convince baby boomers, who are the parents of millennials, that millennials are just like us. Yeah. So very interesting. So Cassida, as you know, the strategic seat that we now have at the table wasn't easy to earn. It came from a lot of research and practice emphasis, where we focus on people-centered policies to drive value added in business. Many years after Ulrich's model, and we're here today. So tell us, what does the strategic look for HR, kind of look like today? And I know that's using the word look too many times, but what does it look like today, and how is it different from what we used to do?
Well, first and foremost, HR leadership includes understanding the business. And I would love to see more people in HR actually coming from the business and coming into HR, because at that point they have more appreciation as to how the business is run. So that's one aspect of strategic HR. The other aspect is revisiting the model from Ulrich. Yes, we have HR partnership, and yes, we have advocacy and administration. But most importantly is the matter of the employee life cycle. So from you attract them right through to when they separate, what does that experience look like? And we don't place enough emphasis on employee experience. Why don't we have in our operating model a department or a unit that just focuses on employee experience? Why not?
You know, it's an interesting question. We pay a lot of attention, marketers do, to the product life cycle
And the customer
and the
experience.
customer experience. You know, and there's always this correlation between the customer experience and the employee experience. You know, I think that beyond this podcast, we're going to have to talk to you a little bit more about that. Maybe a podcast or on its own for that. No, Cassida, it's no secret that culture isn't uh, built overnight. And people have said that culture eats strategy for breakfast. So it still remains relevant and it can make or break a company's ability to adapt, as you know. But in your experience, how are HR leaders shaping company culture today compared to pre-COVID times?
All right. So if you think about it, going back to 10 years, we didn't see as many mergers and acquisitions, joint ventures, and things of that nature, which would shake up a culture. So I can give you a quick example as to what can happen when you're now going cross geographical. Many years ago, probably about 10 years ago, we acquired a company in the USA, and the people in the USA only spoke Spanish, and we in Jamaica speak English. So here we are. We're going to merge with a company that has Spanish speaking people, so it's a different ethnic background to Jamaicans. And that within itself was a good lesson for me as an HR leader at the time and for what I teach here going forward about the matter of two types of cultural transformations. You have the work culture transformation. So if you are laid back in this company and we are fast moving in that company, that's a work culture merge. But if you have ethnic backgrounds, which are different, that's a totally different game. And so it's a matter of merging two types of cultures. And HR leaders have to get up to speed with that. They actually have to learn more about that and have a communication plan as to how they're going to do that going forward. That's missing now.
Well, you know, that's such an important gap to fill, especially now that, you know, we're kind of in the era where there's all this conversation about diversity and inclusion. I think a lot of people kind of forget that part of the role of HR has been to leverage our understanding of DEI to address multiple customer segments. Would you care to kind of share some of the experiences that you've had in helping HR to better manage the way we interact with diverse customer segments?
Well, one example is adding to that is neurodiverse employees, which we don't spend a lot of time on. So we're talking about employees who are very bright. They may be on the spectrum, the autism spectrum, and other types of differences. They're different, but it doesn't mean that they don't add value to a company. And whilst we have a lot of focus outside of Jamaica on that, especially in the UK and the USA and Canada, well, the USA, that's another story that we could talk about another time, but mostly Canada and the UK, there is emphasis there because people are like that. So for HR leaders, we have to come up to speed with the different types of diversity, which includes neurodiversity.
So great. So Cassidy, let's explore a little bit more about this whole conversation here. Because I really think that, you know, this DEI issue is very topical. You know, in some jurisdictions, there's a focus around the employee. In other jurisdictions, there's a focus on understanding that it relates to the customers. And I think in Jamaica, we haven't spent a lot of time focusing too much on the focus on non-discrimination, understanding our customers, and so on. So tell us a little bit more about this kind of fancy word you used earlier and explain how that may be relevant moving forward as the conversation about DEI begins to pick up momentum, almost entering a place of fragmentation. Tell us a little bit more.
Well, going back to what you mentioned, Michael, attention deficit hyperactive disorder. That's really what it is about. But we have a lot of people who are like that. My daughter is like that. All right. So it's nothing for anyone to feel uncomfortable about. It is more for HR leaders to accept and appreciate and understand what the variations mean amongst our workforce. Let's go back to the generations as an example. About 70% of our people in the workplace now are either Gen Zs or millennials, and they themselves have their own diverse way of operating. They like to be entrepreneurs, so they may have things on the side or a side hustle, as they call it, and still be in corporate. How do we manage that? Do we have to have we have to look at diverse types of engagements as well, whether it's the flexi, whether you have freelancing, etc., because that's the workforce that we're dealing with. And going back to persons who may operate differently, you have people who work very well in the night and are terrible with mornings. So remote working and flexible working arrangements now help them to still give as much output as a person who wakes up very early in the morning. So as HR leaders, we have to spend a little bit more time understanding individuals and how they work with teams and how they give output. And diversity, equity, and inclusion has a lot to do with that. Inclusion mostly around ADHD, being on the autism spectrum. We don't understand that enough in Jamaica, and we need to spend the time to do so.
So it almost sounds like we ourselves are on a bit of a learning curve as the HR community. And there's
Absolutely.
a whole bunch of people waiting on us to come up the learning curve so that we can help the rest of the organization.
Yes.
But this is great because I think that what I'm hearing from you is that there are some unexplored areas, there are some underserved topics which need to have their own conversation if we're going to be able to do better at impacting the way businesses and organizations operate.
Yeah.
Perhaps you could just tell me one key change that you would like to see, for example, in the way we practice HR within the Jamaican context, having regard to the fact that we're kind of out of many one people, but we also have our own sets of challenges in the workplace. Is there one thing that kind of stands out for you that if you were to kind of redirect HR practice in a way that becomes next practice, what would that be? And I say this within the context of something funny I heard recently, which is that everybody thought it was impossible until a fool came along who did not know that it was impossible and did it.
For me, it's the whole matter of influence. How do we influence the right decision? So you will know that recently we have gotten some endorsement around our code of ethics and professional conduct. And as HR leaders, we do not spend enough time on what I call scenario planning with situations. So if you're my CEO and you advise me that you want to do X with the staff, and I'm not comfortable with it, from an ethical perspective. I may just say, okay, all right, I'll do it. And I don't question you. But we can question with respect. We can question with scenarios. We can question with data to support the decision so that the right decision is taken rather than being very blind to the fact that if we do go down a particular road, we may have dispute amongst our workforce. So HR leaders being a bit more influential in that regard, but be influential with data and scenario planning as well.
Very interesting. So you've heard it on the HRMAJ podcast that HRMAJ is kind of putting best practice behind us and focusing on next practice. What a great way of explaining how HR as conscience for an organization can evolve in a way that can address issues of ethics and so on. Thanks, Cassida. That was very interesting. So then, as the world of work continues to shift, I think it's becoming clear that HR leaders won't just be responding to change, they'll be the ones driving it. So before this interview comes to an end, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. So let me just ask kind of one kind of big question. What's one thing you think will define exceptional HR leadership going forward? Jack Welch said years ago that a good HR leader has to be part parent and part pastor. No, this is not a pastoral training promotion podcast, but beyond Jack Welch's comment, what do you think is going to make HR leadership look different, distinctly different in the next decade?
For Jamaica innovation, many years we relied heavily on what's happening outside of Jamaica for us to say, okay, they're doing it over here, so we need to do it. We're just as bright as overseas. We are very innovative, we're very creative, and we can be very speedy out of the blocks like any other country. So I'd love us as HR leaders to trust in ourselves, trust in our talent, trust in our intuition, and to make the right decision. And I think COVID has taught us that. We never knew that we could make the paradigm shift to where we are today, where we have meetings online, we have e-learning, we have persons having socials online, we having interviews. You can check your vacation leave online, etc. We never knew we could do all of that, but COVID pushed that. And do we have to have another pandemic to push us further? No, we just have to have the initiative to always be thinking outside of the box as it relates to innovation.
Great. So Cassida, I'm interested in your answer to this because, as you know, um, a lot of us had to learn what it means to supervise people without being able to see them. And COVID taught us that. We're still trying to help our colleagues to learn in the line management how to do that. How successful do you think we have been? And do you think we're winning the battle on that?
I would say we're at probably 60% success because you still have what I call traditional thinking in the workplace, where if I don't see you, you're not working. At the same time, we have to have a balance because we have heard of cases where persons will shift the mouse as if they're actually online. People will do that, all right? They call that vacationing. So it's actually a matter of just balancing the two and having more trust in our people that they will do the right thing and manage by output, not by sitting at a desk.
So, this is a kind of a critical um, piece of our conversation today, because as you know, gig work has kind of become very mainstream. And so you could have people working for you between 9 to 5 or 8 to 4, but they have another job. What are we going to do as HR practitioners, and what do businesses need to consider as people begin to see employment contracts as more flexible because of the abundance of gig work available? What do you see as the necessary response from HR and businesses in this new era?
Right. Thinking from a data perspective, you could actually decide on a percentage of your workforce being fluid or flexible. They don't have to have the full time employment with all the benefits. And it will also help with cost effectiveness as well. And remember, too, it's not just remote work in Jamaica, but you may have Jamaicans working for US based companies or Canada based companies earning hard currency, as well as working with us here in Jamaica. So we have to get to the point where we're flexible and open to that, where persons will have more than one assignment at a time. Again, just managing by data and performance output, which is why performance management now becomes even different, where you're going to have to probably have certain KPIs or key performance indicators that you use to ensure that someone is delivering on what they're supposed to, even though they may have a job outside of the US.
Wow, this is next practice continuing in this
Yes.
conversation. This is going to be very revolutionary. So, Cassida, before we wrap this very great discussion, it's time for a little honesty behind the policy.
Am I going to win someone?
No, not quite. Not today. So this is a confession segment where we're going to ask you, as we will ask all of our guests, to spill just a little truth about what it is really like to work in HR. So I have a bowl here, which I'm going to ask you to pick a question from. Now, I'm warning you that if you pick the wrong question, we're going to have to do this again. And the reason for that is because we need some men in HR. I don't think we have in the entire population more than 20% of males in the profession. So I don't want any question being picked that's going to frighten some young men from coming into the profession. But here goes.
That looks very small. So let me just put on my specs, acknowledging my age. All right, let's
No,
see. Yeah.
no.
Oh Lordy, what is this? What's one thing you wish people would stop doing in interviews?
Go ahead. Spill the beans.
Name dropping. Seriously, interviewees, stop name dropping. I don't need to know that you know the CEO and you and him go way back. I'm not interested. It will not make you get the job.
Cassida, you've just heard from a whole bunch of people to avoid giving up the opportunity to get a job. And thank you very much. This has been a great conversation. Let's say a huge thank you to Dr. Cassida Jones Johnson, President of HRMAJ, for kicking off the People Matter podcast with such depth, clarity, and vision. Whether you're leading a team, advising at the executive level, or building your own HR career from the ground up, now is the time to show up with intention and lead with people in mind. Thank you for tuning in to episode 1 of People Matter. Be sure to follow us on social media, subscribe to the podcast, and join us on the last Wednesday of every month as we spotlight the voices shaping the future of work in Jamaica and the wider Caribbean. Until next time, keep leading with purpose, whether you're HR leader or land leader, and never underestimate the power of people first thinking. Thanks for watching.